There are sounds the human ear was never meant to hear, frequencies that exist in the spaces between silence and noise, vibrations that don't belong to the living world. In 1974, a research laboratory in Eastern Europe conducted an experiment so disturbing, so inexplicable, that its findings were sealed away for decades. The official records claim equipment malfunction. The unofficial accounts speak of something else entirely. Something that suggested consciousness doesn't end when the body does, it only changes frequency. This is the story of an experiment that asked a simple question: what happens to human awareness at the moment of death? The answer it received wasn't simple at all. It was a sound, a pattern, a whisper from somewhere that shouldn't exist. And once you hear it, you can never unhear it. The Institute for Bioacoustic Research stood on the outskirts of Bratislava, a gray concrete structure that seemed designed to be forgotten. It was 1974, and the Cold War had turned scientific inquiry into a quiet battlefield. While the West explored space and the atom, Eastern Bloc researchers pursued stranger territories, the boundaries of human consciousness, the electrical signatures of thought, the frequencies of life itself. Dr. Istvan Kovacs led a team of 12 scientists. His background was unconventional, trained as both a physicist and a neurologist. He believed that consciousness was fundamentally electromagnetic. If thoughts produced measurable brain waves, he reasoned, then perhaps awareness itself operated on frequencies we simply hadn't learned to detect yet. His hypothesis was ambitious, borderline heretical in academic circles. He proposed that human consciousness emitted a unique acoustic signature, a sound that existed below the threshold of normal hearing, in the infrasonic range where vibrations move through flesh and bone rather than air. The experiment was designed with clinical precision. Volunteers, terminally ill patients who had consented to monitoring during their final hours, were placed in an anechoic chamber, a room so silent that the ambient noise level measured negative decibel. Microphones sensitive enough to detect a heartbeat from across a room were positioned at precise intervals. Electromagnetic sensors mapped brain activity. Temperature gauges monitored thermal changes. Every measurable phenomenon associated with dying was recorded, cataloged, analyzed. For the first 3 months, the data was unremarkable. Patients passed away peacefully, their vital signs following expected trajectories. Brain activity diminished, body temperature dropped, electrical signals faded into static. The equipment recorded exactly what medical science predicted it would record. Nothing more. Then came patient 7. Her name has been lost to time or perhaps deliberately erased. The records refer to her only by number. She was 63 years old, dying of an aggressive cancer that had metastasized beyond treatment. She volunteered for the study not out of scientific curiosity, but because she wanted her death to mean something. In her final interview, recorded 3 days before she entered the chamber, she spoke about her fear of disappearing completely, of becoming nothing but silence. She entered the anechoic chamber on November 14, 1974, at 3:17 p.m. The medical team estimated she had perhaps 48 hours remaining. They connected her to the monitoring equipment, adjusted the microphone array, sealed the chamber door, and then they waited. For 36 hours, the data was normal. Her breathing grew shallow. Her heart rate declined. Brain activity followed the expected patterns of metabolic shutdown. The research team monitored in shifts, noting incremental changes, recording observations. Dr. Kovacs remained present throughout, watching the oscilloscopes and frequency analyzers with an intensity that his colleagues would later describe as obsessive. At 3:43 a.m. on November 16th, patient 7's heart stopped. The EKG flatlined, respiration ceased. Core body temperature began its final descent. According to every medical definition, she was dead. The team prepared to enter the chamber and disconnect the equipment, but the microphones were still recording something. Dr. Kovacs noticed it first, a subtle oscillation on the frequency analyzer, a rhythmic pattern in the infrasonic range, far below the 20 Hz threshold of human hearing. At first, he assumed it was electrical interference, some artifact of the monitoring equipment interacting with the hospital's power grid. He checked the connections, verified the calibration. The pattern persisted. It wasn't random noise, it had structure, repetition, almost like a pulse. He increased the recording sensitivity. The pattern became more defined. It wasn't coming from the equipment, it wasn't coming from the building's infrastructure. According to the directional analysis, it was emanating from inside the chamber, from the location where patient 7's body lay. The frequency was 788Z, precisely matching the Schumann resonance, the electromagnetic frequency of Earth's atmosphere itself. But it wasn't constant. It wavered, rose, and fell in gentle undulations like breathing, like a heartbeat that existed in sound rather than flesh. Dr. Kovacs made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He began recording at higher fidelity, extending the session far beyond standard protocol. Minutes became hours. The sound continued. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it began to change. Harmonics emerged, overtones that shouldn't exist in natural phenomena. The bass frequency remained at 788Z, but layered above it were patterns that suggested complexity, organization. The audio engineers who later analyzed the recordings would struggle for language to describe it. It wasn't music, but it had rhythm. It wasn't speech, but it had cadence. It was as if something was trying to communicate using the vocabulary of vibration rather than words. At 6:22 a.m., nearly 3 hours after clinical death, the sound abruptly intensified. The frequency spiked to 12 Hz, then 15, climbing through ranges that resonated in human bone and tissue. Inside the control room, every member of the research team felt it, a pressure in their chests, a vibration in their skulls, the sensation of being touched by something invisible. Then, for exactly 17 seconds, the recording equipment captured something that shouldn't have been possible: a voice. Not a voice in the conventional sense. There were no words, no recognizable phonemes, but there was intention, pattern, meaning encoded in frequency and duration. The audio analysis showed complex modulation, rapid shifts between harmonic intervals that human vocal cords couldn't produce. It sounded like someone speaking underwater backwards through layers of static and time. Dr. Kovacs played it back at reduced speed, shifting the frequency up into audible range. The result was chilling. What emerged sounded almost like singing, a melodic phrase that rose and fell with emotional weight. Several members of the team reported the same visceral response: profound sadness mixed with something they couldn't name, not quite peace but perhaps release. The recording ended as abruptly as it began. At 6:23 a.m., the sound ceased entirely. The equipment registered nothing but the ambient electromagnetic noise of the universe itself. Whatever had been generating the frequencies was gone. The team entered the chamber. Patient 7's body showed no unusual characteristics. Temperature, rigor mortis, cellular breakdown, all proceeded according to normal biological timelines. There was no physical explanation for what the microphones had captured, no residual electromagnetic fields, no equipment malfunctions, just silence and a recording that suggested consciousness had briefly existed outside the boundaries of living tissue. Dr. Kovacs wanted to publish immediately. He believed they had documented proof of post-mortem neural activity, evidence that awareness persisted in some electromagnetic form after clinical death. His colleagues were less certain. The implications were staggering, the evidence unorthodox. Academic careers could be destroyed by association with research that sounded like spiritualism disguised as science. The debate became moot when the government intervened. 3 days after patient 7's death, military intelligence officers arrived at the institute. They confiscated all recordings, all data, all documentation related to the experiment. The official explanation cited irregularities in research protocol and concerns about patient consent procedures. The true reason was never stated, but the researchers understood. Their work had ventured into territories the state considered dangerous. Questions about consciousness and death carried ideological implications. What if awareness survived the body? What if materialism, the philosophical foundation of the regime, was incomplete? the experiment was terminated. The equipment was dismantled. The team was disbanded, its members reassigned to separate institutions where they couldn't collaborate or compare notes. Dr. Kovacs was forbidden from discussing his findings publicly. For all practical purposes, the experiment had never happened, but several researchers kept their personal notes. Hidden copies of the recordings survived, passed quietly between colleagues who couldn't let the question die. Over the following decades, fragments of the data began circulating in academic underground networks. Soviet dissidents, Western parapsychologists, audio engineers fascinated by anomalous phenomena. The recordings were analyzed, debated, dismissed, and defended in equal measure. In 1982, a similar experiment was attempted at a hospital in Stockholm. The methodology was nearly identical: terminally ill volunteers, anechoic chamber, high-sensitivity acoustic monitoring. The research team had somehow obtained copies of Dr. Kovacs's original protocol. They wanted to see if the phenomenon could be replicated. It could. Out of 7 monitored deaths, 3 produced the same infrasonic patterns, the same 7/8 Hz bass frequency, the same gradual emergence of harmonic complexity. One recording captured what sounded like 2 distinct frequencies interacting, as if 2 sources were harmonizing. The patient had died alone in the chamber. Medical staff reported no electromagnetic anomalies, no equipment errors, just sound where sound shouldn't exist. The Stockholm team faced the same bureaucratic pressure as their predecessors. Research was suspended, data was classified, but word spread through the international scientific community. Researchers in Japan, Canada, Argentina all began quietly exploring the same questions. What they discovered was consistent. In a small percentage of monitored deaths, roughly 15%, acoustic anomalies appeared in the infrasonic range, persisting for minutes to hours after clinical death. The patterns varied, but the fundamental characteristics remained constant. Bass frequency near the Schumann resonance, harmonic complexity, gradual fading, and occasionally something that sounded almost intentional. The scientific establishment largely ignored these findings. The evidence was circumstantial, the methodology questionable, the implications too radical to accept. But those who worked directly with the data couldn't dismiss what they had heard. Audio engineers noted that the frequency patterns resembled nothing in nature, not geological processes, not electromagnetic phenomena, not biological systems. The modulation was too precise, too organized. It suggested awareness. Dr. Istvan Kovacs died in 1997. His final interview, conducted by a documentary filmmaker who had tracked him down in retirement, was brief. He spoke carefully, aware that even decades later there were those who didn't want these questions asked. But when pressed about what he truly believed he had recorded in 1974, his answer was unambiguous. "I believe," he said, "that consciousness is not produced by the brain. I believe it is received by the brain the way a radio receives a signal. When the body dies, the radio stops working, but the signal continues. What we recorded was not the end of awareness. It was awareness changing form, becoming acoustic, a vibration in the fundamental frequency of existence itself." He paused, staring at something beyond the camera. "We hear with our ears," he continued, "but we listen with something deeper. And that night in November, I listened to something that proved we are more than meat and electricity. We are patterns, frequencies, songs that play on instruments we haven't yet learned to name." The filmmaker asked if he had kept any of the original recordings. Dr. Kovacs smiled but didn't answer. Today, the Institute for Bioacoustic Research is an empty building, scheduled for demolition. The anechoic chamber where patient 7 died has been sealed for 40 years, its interior unchanged since the experiments ended. Local urban explorers claim the building is haunted, that standing outside the chamber door, you can sometimes hear a low humming sound, felt more than heard, resonating in your chest like a second heartbeat. These claims are unverified, anecdotal, the kind of stories that grow around abandoned places with dark histories. But acoustic engineers who have tested the building report unusual readings. infrasonic frequencies that shouldn't be present, patterns in the electromagnetic noise that seem almost structured. The original recordings from 1974 have never been publicly released. Most copies were destroyed or lost. But in 2019, an anonymous source uploaded a 17-second audio file to an obscure academic forum. The file was quickly removed, but not before several researchers downloaded it. Analysis confirmed it matched the descriptions from Dr. Kavax's reports. Bass frequency 788Z, complex harmonic overtones, patterns suggesting intentional modulation. One audio engineer enhanced the recording, shifting the frequencies into audible range, isolating the harmonic layers. What he heard made him stop working on the project entirely. When asked about it later, he would only say, "It sounded like someone calling, not calling for help, just calling. Like they were trying to tell us they were still there." The question Dr. Kavax asked in 1974 remains unanswered. What happens to consciousness at the moment of death? Medical science provides one answer: neural activity ceases, awareness ends, identity dissolves into chemistry and entropy. But the recordings suggest a different possibility. That death is not termination, but transformation. That awareness doesn't vanish, it shifts frequency, moving into ranges our living bodies can't perceive. If this is true, the implications are staggering. It means that everyone who has ever died may still exist in some form, vibrating at frequencies that permeate space and time. It means that grief is not the recognition of absence, but the awareness of separation, the living and the dead divided not by existence, but by the ability to perceive each other. It means we are surrounded always by voices calling from frequencies we cannot hear. Some researchers continue investigating these phenomena, working in institutional shadows where controversial ideas can survive. They use different terminology now: post-mortem electromagnetic persistence, consciousness as quantum field phenomenon, acoustic signatures of neural coherence. The language has changed, but the question remains the same. Are we recording echoes of fading biology, or are we eavesdropping on something that survives? The experiments continue quietly in laboratories that don't advertise their work. More recordings accumulate, more patterns emerge, and slowly, carefully, a new understanding begins to form. Not proof, not yet, but evidence, suggestions. Whispers in the frequency spectrum that something immense is hiding in plain sound. Patient 7's real name was Anna Dvorakova. This information wasn't discovered until 2003, when a researcher found her daughter and explained what her mother had contributed to science. The daughter listened to the story, then asked if she could hear the recording. The researcher said it was unavailable, classified, or destroyed. A lie, perhaps merciful. But the daughter said something that the researcher never forgot. "My mother used to hum when she was happy, not a melody really. Just a sound, a vibration she made in her throat. She said it made her feel connected to something larger than herself, like she was harmonizing with the world." The researcher checked the frequency of the sound Anna's daughter described. 788Z, the Schumann resonant, the fundamental frequency of Earth's electromagnetic field. The same frequency Anna's body emitted for 3 hours after her heart stopped beating. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps she was harmonizing. Perhaps death isn't silence at all, but a song that our living ears are too dense to hear. And perhaps every human who has ever died continues singing, their voices layered into the acoustic fabric of existence itself, vibrating in frequencies that move through matter and time, waiting for someone to build the right instrument to finally, truly listen. The laboratory in Bratislava will be demolished next year. The chamber where all of this began will be broken into rubble and dust. But sound doesn't die when its source is destroyed. Sound is vibration, and vibration is eternal. It moves outward forever, changing form but never truly ending. Somewhere in the infrasonic depths of the world, frequencies continue to pulse, patterns continue to organize themselves. And if you knew where to listen, if you had the right equipment and the courage to use it, you might hear something calling back. Not a ghost, not a memory. Just awareness, stripped of flesh and brain and blood, existing as pure vibration in the electromagnetic symphony of the universe. Still conscious, still present, still singing its name into the darkness between atoms. Some mysteries don't fade, they wait. And some sounds once recorded are never truly silent again.